Hi guys. I was assigned chapter 9 from the Tatum book for my horizontal case study. And chapter 9 is Identity Development in Multiracial Families. So I'm going to start off with a little bit of history that I pulled from that chapter, information it had about being biracial, the parent's role in a multiracial family, and then a reflection. So a little bit of history. Up until the year 2000, you were only allowed to choose one race for the US Census. So you could not choose Asian and Black. You could not choose white and Black. You could not choose white and Latino or Latinx. You had to choose one. So this really has quite an impact on racial identity when you're forced to choose one. Another little bit of history, there was a law that a lot of the states had a long time ago. I don't have the dates that it was in effect or the states, but the one drop rule. So if you had anyone ever in your family who was Black, then you were forced to identify as Black. This applied only to people who were Black. And so a woman named Susie Guillory Phipps in 1982 went to apply for a passport. She filled out her paperwork and she chose white as her race because that's the way she was raised. That's how she identified. She identified as white. That's what she was to herself. However, her birth certificate apparently was filled out by the midwife when she was born, and the midwife knew that there was someone in her, she had distant relatives or something like that who were Black. So the midwife wrote Black on this woman's birth certificate. This caused problems with her getting a passport. She tried to fight it legally, and they would not change her birth certificate. And the one drop rule remained in this case. Being biracial. So there are 4 different ways of if you're biracial that you can have a different. There's 4 different identities. Holy cow! So the singular identity is where you choose one race. So you're biracial, but you choose one race. Border identity is you identify as biracial. Protean identity shifts back and forth, so it depends on the environment that you're in, the people that you're around, but you can identify as one race in this situation and the other race in another situation. And then there's transcendent identity, where you do not identify, you have no race. You identify as not having a race. So different things that affect identity are phenotype, which is how you look. So that can be how the world sees you, or it can be how you see yourself, but it's based on looks. Where you live can affect how you identify. Being in the country, being in the city, being in a mostly white community, a mostly Black community, a mostly Asian community, how you were raised and the culture. So your parents and your extended family have a lot of impact on that. And then experiences of privilege, prejudice, and discrimination. So I had just mentioned the parents' role. This chapter talked about how parents of biracial children should work to help their children see themselves or see their race positively and with affirmation. You don't want your children to be embarrassed about or ashamed of a race that they are. They should be proud of who they are. It also talked about how the colorblind mentality is not helpful. So you shouldn't just not address the fact that they are a certain race or they are a couple of different combined races. There's one section in the book that talks about how they need to discuss racism with their children, because they will run into it and they need to know how to handle it. There was also a section about adoptive parents. So if the adoptive parents are a different race than the children, they really need to work hard to make sure that they are affirming the race of the children or the races of the children, that they are going to be able to be around other people with their race, their culture that they came from. So there was an example of a boy named Alan. He was Black and he had white adoptive parents. They made sure that his race and his culture was affirmed in his life, and he did very well. The section I'm going to read is the opposite. So it says, in one instance, a young woman reported that when she was a child, a Korean, I guess I should open that up. Okay. When she was a child, a Korean family friend had offered to take her to Korean cultural events, but her parents had declined the offers, encouraging instead her to complete assimilation into her adoptive culture. Unfortunately, complete assimilation was not possible because she did not look the part. Her Asian features continually set her apart, but with no cultural connection to any Asian community, she had no one to share these experiences with and no help in learning how to cope with the racism she encountered. So, and then a little bit later on it says, in a way, I think my parents messed up in that they taught me to hate what I really was. Maybe if they hadn't ignored my racial heritage so much, I would have an easier time accepting that I am an Asian and that I will always be, that I always will be. That was on page 323 of the Tatum book. Oh. So, my last section of my presentation is reflection. So, something that I've pulled from this chapter is that racial identity is similar to gender identity. So you don't want to just assume that someone is a certain gender, just like you would not want to assume someone is a certain race. It can be offensive if you're wrong, if you say differently than what they identify as. Also, parents should address race rather than ignore it, just like I had mentioned before. And then a way that I can apply this in my future in education is not just with biracial students, but with students of any cultural heritage, try to pull that in to my classroom, whether it be with artwork from different cultures, books, teaching the history of different cultures, or even incorporating food into the classroom, because everyone loves having food of different cultures and learning about them that way. So anyways, that is everything. So I appreciate you watching. Thank you so much.